Winning some of your opponent's pieces will not end the battle. Checkmating him will.
Thanks, Oliver. In this lecture, we'll be learning the fundamentals of checkmate. The first thing you've got to know is that it is much harder to checkmate a king in the center of the board than if it is on the edge or the corner. And I'll explain why. Take a look at that black king on e5. In order to checkmate it, you need to attack all these squares. Look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And that's a lot of squares, I can tell you that. Now, in this example, those two rooks are controlling 6 squares, and now we need to put the queen somewhere in order to checkmate the king. There we go. So we've got 9 squares under control. Those squares highlighted in red. But we need a lot of striking power to checkmate the king. 2 rooks and a queen, and that's a lot of pieces. Now, let's see what happens when the king is on the edge of the board. And let's count the number of squares which we need to attack. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that's still a lot of squares, but much less than 9. Here, for example, we only need 2 rooks to checkmate the king. It can be done with less striking power than 2 rooks, but in this example, it's easy to see that those 2 rooks control those 6 squares. And this time we have a white king in the corner. And let's see how many squares we need to attack now. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Only 4 squares. So you can see it is much easier to checkmate a king which is in the corner than a king that is in the middle of the board. And here's an example, those 2 little pawns controlling those squares next to the king, and all we need to do now is bring our rook all the way down. And there you go, checkmate. Now we're going to see some examples of checkmate in one move using only one piece. And that's quite unusual because normally you'll need at least 2 pieces. Now let's take a look at this first position. If we check the king can simply move over here, and that's certainly not checkmate. We'll need to bring our king closer to the black king before we can actually checkmate him. So let's see what happens when we add a rook next to the king. Look at that. That's checkmate because the black king doesn't have the b8 square to run away. That rook is what we call a blocker. Blockers can make checkmates easier for you sometimes, not always. But in this case, the queen can do checkmate in one move because the king has nowhere to go, because there is a blocker on b8. Here's another example. Here, if we move our queen to f1 to check the king is simply going to run away. So it would be nice if we could put a blocker on h2 so that after queen to f1, this king would have nowhere to go. Like this. Now there's a pawn. That pawn is a blocker. So after queen to f1, we have checkmate. So you can see all those squares are under control. That pawn is the blocker, so the king has nowhere to go. Here's another example. We've got a queen. There is a blocker here, but still, if we move our queen over here, the king can still run away. So if only we could have a blocker on e7, then queen to h8 would be checkmate. So there we go. Granted. Our wish is granted. There you go. Queen to h8, checkmate. Here's another example. We could bring our rook all the way down, but then the king would run away thanks to that square over here. But if we had that square occupied by a blocker, then rook to e8 would be checkmate. Like this. There you go. Rook to e8 is checkmate now. The black king has 3 blockers right in front of him, and that's why we can achieve checkmate. As you can see in all these examples, the strong side is able to checkmate because of those blockers, which make our life easier sometimes. In this position, the check on h2 is not checkmate because the king can still go to g3. So maybe we could put a blocker on g3 like this. There you go, the king has nowhere to go now, and rook to h2 is checkmate. Here's another example. If the rook comes down, the king can run away, but if we put another blocker on a3, then rook to c2 would be checkmate, like this. There you go. Here's another example. If we go bishop to e4, the king can still go to a7, so we need a blocker on a7, like this, a little pawn. And look at that, we just need a bishop to checkmate the king. And in this example, if we go bishop check, the king can still run away. So we're going to put a blocker on b7. There you go. And now bishop here is checkmate. Pretty much the same idea. If we move our knight to c7, then the king is going to run away. So we're going to put a blocker on b7. There you go. Knight to c7, checkmate. And one last position, again, if we go knight to b6, the king can run away. So if we put a blocker on b7 like this, then knight to b6 is checkmate. All right, in this lecture, we've learned how difficult it is to checkmate a king when that king is in the middle of the board. And we've also learned that it's much easier to checkmate the king when that king is on the edge of the board or the corner. And what else have we learned? We've learned about blockers and how useful they can be to help us achieve checkmate in some positions.